Our next speaker is Reverend Herb Knudsen. Herb followed Bill Crowell and served our church for the longest period of any minister to date, from 1973 to 1990. During Herb's ministry, we further enhanced the church with remodeling an organ, removing the steeple, paving the parking lot, and acquiring the annex. We also grew. 4 times we were awarded the distinction of being recognized as one of the fastest growing disciples congregations. We had a vibrant youth group and countless missions. We also became a teaching parish, which continues to be a blessing today. Herb was actually the minister when I joined, and I can speak personally to the vibrant and faithful church under his ministry. Following his time with us, he blessed another vibrant congregation and served as regional minister and president of the Illinois-Wisconsin region. We do have accomplished ministers. Please welcome Reverend Herb Knudsen.
Thank you, Karen. It is kind of hard to believe that I arrived January 1, 1973 at the age of 26 and a half. And I left when I was 44, and so 18 years is really a long-term ministry. It was my first solo pastorate. I had been 3 years as a student assistant and 1 year and a half in another, so I basically had a year and a half more experience than Bill did when you hired him. I arrived with a cute young blonde wife with 2 boys, 3 years old and 6 months, and a puppy. The boys went on from preschool through high school here, graduated from Downers Grove North High School. My boys thrived here, and they still have some of their best friends in life. And this village helped raise them. Rob was a cross-country star and on the state championship team. Chris was co-captain of the football team and an all-star in that. And I can remember particularly Ollie Pachillo when she would serve the luncheon, the retreats afterwards. And young Chris loves sweets like his father does. And so this little kid would come up and put his hand up and grab as many donuts or cookies as he could and run off and hide them and come back and get some more. And he'd build this cache over here. And then after about the 4th trip, Ollie would say, "That's enough, Chris." And he'd go, "Okay." He'd run over to his cache and sit down and eat up. But Ollie took care of it. Duff grew here from a homemaker and a community leader to a real estate sales and management, and a very successful career there. So this was a great place, both community and congregation, to raise a family. And I grew up here too, professionally and personally. I got my doctorate while I was here. We bought our home for the first time while we were here. I had a trip to the Holy Land. After many years of wrangling about policies, I got a sabbatical leave and took that. And thanks to Dick Sherry and Jackie Meisig and Betty Schultz, we showed the world that it could be done. And that policy has become a model for use within the denomination. So, Karen took a lot of the stuff I was going to say, so that's okay. Let's think about church life here for a minute. Now, we didn't know all this theory then. You learn some of it later, like when you're a regional minister. But at different stages in life of a congregation, you need different styles of leadership. And so successful founding pastors, like Bill, are basically entrepreneurial. They're pioneers. They're able to forge a pathway into the wilderness. They are able to build something out of nothing, sell a vision, and attract people to it. And Bill was great at that. And I could never do that. I was asked a couple times if I would help start a new church, and I said, I don't want to do that. I want a building, I want a staff, I want people. I don't want to start from scratch. I'm much better at editing and improving and enlarging and building on it. And so second pastors need to be more like a settler and not a pioneer. They need to be like a CEO who are able to take the vision and put some legs on it. Do organizational things, build systems and buildings, and grow and develop leaders and mission and staffs. And none of that is something that I did by myself. I always felt like I was doing that as part of a team. And I was blessed by that. And build we did, intentionally, with long-range plans and surveys and big, hairy, audacious goals and ridiculous annual reports that I started doing that I wish I had never started doing because they became huge labels. But as you go back and try to look at what you've done, they are great documents to help you. But we did do many things in facilities and programs and mission and calling. You've heard about the pipe organ and the remodeling and the annex and the parking lots. Working with Bob Wynn to help make that parking lot happen was one of the great joys. And when I've done it in other places. And so when I get to the pearly gates, they're going to say, what did you do in ministry? And I'll say, I built parking lots. And hopefully they'll say, come on in. During that period of ministry, we had 425 new members that were added to our rolls. And that was a remarkable thing because we were also losing about 10 to 20% a year because this place was constantly turning over. And so evangelism was something we had to work at all the time. And we got those awards for being among the fastest growing. But more than buildings and stuff like that was we developed a strong emphasis and focus on mission. Those trips with the kids, 2 seminaries in Lombard, Bethany and Northern Baptist got a grant. And they wanted to work with some local churches to address the isms in communities, particularly racism. And they came to Downers Grove and they were looking for churches, and First Methodist and Gloria Day Lutheran and First Christian said we would do that. And so Brian Sickberg and Rollins Smith worked with the 3 churches. And we did some great things, including identifying that there was a critical need for a group home for girls in this town. And we established that home. One of our families, Linda and Larry Bird, became the house parents for that house. And we helped make that happen. And that lasted for about 5 to 8 years. We did a lot of things in public housing and a lot of education events. But working with seminary students became something that we got kind of excited about. So when the divinity school came to us and asked us if we'd become a teaching parish site, and if I'd become an adjunct faculty field supervisor, we said, sure. And sure enough, over those 12 years that I worked with them, we had 10 students. And when I see those students, they always talk about how important you were to them in nurturing them, affirming them, building them up, and letting them experience ministry, including letting them have access to the pulpit 6 times during their time that they were there. That accessibility to you personally and to our congregational life was unique, and it was generous, and the stories I could tell. I'll share 2 of them. One of them was I took Peter Browning with me calling one time, and we went to call on Bob and Beatrice Roberts. Now, Beatrice had very poor circulation, so she kept that house at 100 million degrees. It was hotter than Hades in there. And then they would always say, here, Reverend, sit in the easy chair. I said, no, 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 I want the hard chair. No, the easy chair. I always fell asleep. And I mean, they talked like this about what they were doing. And of course, I'd fall asleep, and then I'd wake up, and they were still talking about what they were doing. So I told Peter, I said, I am going to fall asleep. You need to cover for me. He goes, what? You can't do that. How could you fall asleep on somebody? I said, trust me, I will. And so he was all nervous and all primed and getting ready to do that. And I looked over there, and Peter had fallen asleep before I had. And he learned that you have those kinds of things you do in pastor ministry. This week, in his column, Michael Karunas, who I think is probably one of the finest preachers the denomination has. He followed me, I did the interim down there at Central Christian in Decatur. He wrote this in his column. He said, "I will never forget my first sermon as a student pastor at First Christian Church, Downers Grove. It was October 1996, and my text was Philippians 4:1-9. I wanted to bring all the things that I had learned thus far in my divinity school experience into this sermon. I hope to show the congregation how insightfully and intricately I could read a Bible text and provide sound relevance for the members for their everyday living. In that passage, Paul lists virtues that mark the life of a disciple of Christ. They happen to be virtues with a basis in Greek philosophy. And I remember wanting to say that Paul was a genius using the language of his audience that he spoke to Greek philosophy as a way of relating to them. I remember the sermon falling flat on its face. Even 18 years later, I recall how during the sermon I was delivering it, I recognized that I was losing the congregation. I was not speaking their language or making my words compatible with them. Whatever the message I wanted to share was lost. Well, in the receiving line afterwards, everyone was really quite nice. Congratulatory, offering words of affirmation, telling me how good I was and proud they were of me standing up there speaking, except for one. He was a retired professor of medicine in a local university. I have no idea who that was. Highly intelligent, but also by this point old, bent over, and talking very loudly due to a hearing loss. He seemed to shout at me as he walked out. "I don't understand a word you said. Next time, just tell a few good stories." Peter wouldn't be the preacher, not Peter. Michael wouldn't be the preacher today, and neither would Peter be the chaplain at Drury University, or professor that he is today, if it weren't for this congregation. You were significant in your outreach giving and denominational mission funds, knowing that we always said as a model that we couldn't ask members to tithe if we ourselves weren't tithing. And so we always did that. You always won awards for that in like-sized congregations. I will never forget the generosity that we had with the monthly second plate pass to help Mike and Sharon Blanford when she was pregnant and had a brain tumor, and they spent several months up at Mayo Clinic. And it was truly miraculous that that child was able to be born and that it was cancer-free. And in the following checkups with Sharon, her brain tumor, was gone. Doctors couldn't explain it other than prayer and miracle. And it was your love and your generosity and your prayers that made that difference with that plate pass and that support. And you got so much into that, we created the In As Much Fund, where we continued to do things to help others. And that story got told at the General Assembly of the Christian Church when they invited Emma Sloan to come and share what one church was doing in mission. And that story is in your book, what she shared with them. We were blessed as a congregation that our members could do many things. And who can ever forget Lot Long and how she created the Tender Loving Care preschool. What a perfect name it was for her. Fred had died. She was trying to figure out what to do with her life. And she had a lot of love she wanted to give the little kids. And she ran that preschool until she herself was ready. But it was always fun to go over and help her set it up and take it down and hear her stories and support her and make that happen. And TLC was one of the best in town. And just as we benefited by the generosity of the Maywood and the Villa Park congregations in our beginning, so we too helped start a new congregation in the Aurora, Naperville area. Many of our households went there to make that church have a start. I served on the new church start development committee, and so did some others from the congregation. We had a staff, our leadership, our fellowship that grew, that was so meaningful. Probably the most important person we ever had on our staff was Dave Norton, who just came out of the blue and became our music director. And I wanted to sing in choir, Terry, but the choir told me I wasn't allowed because I would hurt them greatly. But our music program has always been strong. We had volunteer pianists in Lanny Bell and June Miller and Barbara Richardson. June knew what she was doing. Lanny didn't have a clue. He could just sit there and invent music, just playing all along by ear. He was amazing. And June was a precision piano teacher. Barb came along, and then we trained her to be the organist, and Bonnie Walker learned how to be the organist, and Doris Celesti. We had a great music staff. I started with the part-time secretary during the interim after Bill left. They said, we need to have somebody do all the stuff that Bill was doing. So they hired Barney Clark, and she worked 8 hours a week. And then we had 4 others after that, Florence Clark and Joyce Hickman and Barb Schmidt and Annette Worley. Custodial was always amazing. You know who the custodians were? You. Every family was assigned a weekend to come over and clean. And 90% of the time it got done. But you took that as a serious responsibility because we wanted to make sure that we could do that. And of course, as we got older, that's a little more difficult. And at the end, we hired a part-time custodian. But I always thought that was a generous thing that you all did to help make that church happen. And we hired child care at that time because it was important for that. And of course, the student associates. The elders and I always met together every month for prayer and study and conversation. We had a proactive personnel committee that always, those documents became models for the denomination. And so there's many things like that as we built the systems. I can still remember how excited Duff and I were when we had our first search committee team that came and visited us in Edinburgh. Ned Lavengood, John Blanford, Dale Butterfield, and Wayne Brandt. These 4 executives out of Chicago stood out like a sore thumb in that small church with all those farmers. And my youngest son had been put in the hospital the night before. And so Duff was up with them, and I served them dinner, and they were amazed that I could even talk to them with all that other stuff going on. But that led to another thing in another interview. And I can still remember sitting there in the back, looking up at that awesome room, that sanctuary, and feeling how lucky I was that I was being considered to serve in this church. And I can also remember how sad we were when we had to leave. We knew it was time for us to have a new challenge, and it was the right moment in Duff's career as well. And both boys had now graduated from high school, so it was time to move on. The prophet in Ecclesiastes is right. For everything there is a season, a time for every matter under heaven. A time to arrive, and a time to leave, a time to begin, and a time to end. So all I can say is thanks be to God for all that happened in between those 18 wonderful years we shared together. At our 25th anniversary, 21 years ago, I gave Duff 25 roses and a card that said, thanks for 25 great years. And Duff's response to that was, well, they weren't all great. So the next morning when we got up, 7 of those roses had drooped over and were dead. And I said, well, how about 18 great years? And she said, that's about right. So what can I say? Hey, you know, if I was batting 720 in baseball, I'd have a major contract right now. It would be huge. I think it's safe to say we had a great time together. But obviously not all of those were perfect years or great years. And what I can truly say is we did build one another up as we bonded and binded together. And for that, I am grateful. There's many more things that I could lift up. And I'm sure you have memories of some of those that you can help me remember myself, even though, because many times I can't even remember what I had for breakfast. But I do remember with great fondness and heart the time to be here and to celebrate with you that time. So please know that Doug and I and Rob and Chris are eternally grateful for this time we spent with all of you here in Downers Grove. And we are pleased to celebrate this 50th anniversary with you, even though the two boys couldn't be here. But we, too, are going to look forward to many reports of the new things that you are doing and the achievements you're having together in serving Christ. And we celebrate with you the next speaker, who is the one that's going to lead you into that future. Because you've got an awesome minister right now in Terry. God bless you.